I'm 16. Fine! Got a 16 then! 16 bagels! No, wait, I want donuts, not bagels! Jeez, make up your mind.
My son is now an independent reader in all his languages, English, French, and Korean. In my last video, I explained what we did to get my eldest from reluctant reader in English to, well, you see it in the video, enthusiastic reader in English. So check it out if you want to follow his journey from the start. I link the video in the description. Today, I'll explain how he became an independent reader in French and Korean. So just for the precision, when I say independent, I mean that he can read in his languages, but also that he wants to read and would pick up any book in any language spontaneously. When did we start on our multi-literacy journey? I waited until my son showed interest. I didn't want to rush him, and that's the benefit of teaching our own languages, not as part of the school curriculum, is that we can really go at our children's pace. So I waited and waited and waited until he was 6.5 years old. By 6, he was starting to decode English quite well, nothing compared to the speed you've heard him read at the beginning of the video, but he could read just fast enough to enjoy reading books with not much writing in it. Because he could read English, he could also decode a bit French. So the way I saw his interest is that he was trying to read the messages I was sending to my family in French. And so one day I asked him if he wanted to be able to read in French, if he wanted me to teach him. And he said yes. That was after multiple attempts. So the good thing then was that because I started after he could read in English, is that I could leverage loads of things. So the first thing was that he could see that the signs on the paper represented the sounds he could read. Some combinations of signs can make a different sound as well. Several signs together make a word, and many of those signs are similar in French and English, even though some might be read differently. So it started off really well. He was progressing fast and he was happy. I was really happy. A bit too much, and I was doing a bit too much. So I was putting pressure on him without really realizing it. And at some point, he started to say he wanted to stop learning to read and write in French. I didn't want him to have a bad experience, so I stopped. It lasted about 2 months. And then he started showing interest again, but this time it was for Korean. And when I asked him if he wanted me to teach him to read in Korean, he was a little hesitant at the beginning. But we agreed on 2 things for him to be okay to start on the journey without being too apprehensive. The first one was that we would do these games, learning games, once a week, not too much for him and not too much for me, who had to prepare everything. And the second thing was that we would stop whenever he would be tired. So then I created other games than those I used to teach him French. And I used mainly cards, some PowerPoints, and I wanted him to have a very different experience from Korean and French. So the aim was really to make everything as different as possible from his experience of French, because it didn't start really well. Well, it started well, but then he got a bit of pressure and he wanted to stop. So I wanted to do something very different. It worked really well because after a while, he asked me if he could start to learn again French. But he said, I want to learn like I learned Korean. So he liked all these games we were doing in Korean. They were a bit less when we were doing French. So he liked that and he wanted to carry on. If you want to see exactly how I taught my son to read in Korean, make sure to check this video that I link in the description below. First tip of this video is don't be more excited than your child and follow their leads. And also that if your approach doesn't work once or the first time, you can always stop and come back to it later. And if you want to know more about all these games, I have explained them all in the Parents Guide to Raising Multi-literate Children. So I'm going to put the link in the description below. What helped with fluency? So to become more and more fluent, there is no secret. We need to read more and more frequently. So along the games we were doing, we kept on reading in French and Korean, in addition to English, by the way. And we did that regularly on a daily basis. So my wife and I would be those reading, and there would be, so him and his brother would be enjoying the stories. But he would also look at what we were reading. So it was still, like, he would still get some reading out of it. So here are two types of books that work really well to help my son become more fluent reading in French. The first type of books that worked were blocks of games. The advantage of them is that there is very little reading, so the instructions or the explanation about what the activity is about, and then there is a lot of fun, so the activity lasts a lot longer than reading the instructions. And the second type of book that really worked were laugh out loud comic books, like Dogman, for example. That was the book, I think, that helped him become fluent in French. So the advantage about these books is that there is a lot of pictures, so we can understand the story more or less. My son would see all these images of people falling, shouting, etc. He would want to understand why they were doing all of this, so he would read the speech bubbles. So that's why he was trying to read, to understand why it was fun. So here's my third tip. Find the books that your child is going to love so much that they will want to read, even if they find it a bit challenging. Now you're going to ask me, what about writing? So for reading, it was relatively easy to find resources that were entertaining and that they wanted to read. For writing, it was a lot more difficult. We tried journaling in different ways, but it can be great, but it didn't really take off with our children. However, one type of book that worked really well were wordless books. So the reason they work so well is because first you can tell the story the way you want, and you can do it in any language. But with these books, what we did was that we put speech bubbles on post-it notes at the bottom of the page, and my son had to take the speech bubble, read it, and see which character it would go with. And what helped us well was to include a bit of humor, so to write some silly things, but that would go with the facial expression of the character or the situation. It was just a bit silly, so he would want to find out what silly thing we had written for him to take and put in the right place. And later on, we used this to include some writing as well. So instead of just having speech bubbles that were completed, we'd leave a couple that were blank. Those that worked really well were those with onomatopoeia, so the sounds. It would be like something falling on the floor, like a bang, or a boom for an explosion, or when people shouted. He could write things like very expressive things, so he would be able to say what the people were saying and make them say it. It would be really silly things sometimes, but it made him laugh, and the main thing is that he was writing. One tip I would give as well regarding writing or reading is that you need to try to keep a ratio of 80% of fun for 20% of effort work. And at the beginning, these 20% of effort won't seem much. For writing, for example, it's going to look like a few words written here and there, or a sentence, but little by little, as they practice more and more, they will be able to write longer text, so a few sentences, a paragraph, a short text. So seeing how fun he would find this, so putting the speech bubbles to different characters or writing them, he would find it even more fun because he could write silly things on his own. So this inspired me to create my own book for multilingual children. It's called In Search of the Lost Word. So if you want to check it out, it's going to be on Kickstarter very soon. So you can register yourself. And if you watch the video a bit later, it might already be out. So I'm going to invite you to check my website. I'm going to leave all the links in the description below. So up to now, I talked about French. And for French, it took about 8 months for him to be a fluent reader, independent reader, so he would want to take a book and start reading. For Korean, it took a lot more time. It took a few more years for him to become an independent reader. So why so much difference between the two languages, even if it's the same parents teaching these languages? It's not because Korean is a different script, by the way. I want to make that really clear. I'm going to explain what made this journey a bit longer for Korean. The first thing is that because we didn't find books that he loved enough for him to read, he wasn't reading that much in Korean. And because my wife and I found it difficult to find some time to prepare all these activities in Korean, because even though I had the ideas, my wife is the one who speaks Korean fluently. So in the end, we ended up putting our son in a Korean Saturday school. And let's say that my son seems to be allergic to anything that looks like work. Because he, like my youngest, like really enjoyed it. And yeah, he would be happy to go. But my eldest would really be reluctant to attend the lesson. And when he was attending the lesson, he wasn't really listening. So it made the experience a bit more negative than for French. So this is why it took some more time. But everything changed during our last trip to Korea a few months ago, because we found books that they can't get enough of. My eldest and my youngest, they love these books and they want to read them, they want to discover what's in them, so they read quite a lot on their own. And bedtime stories is another thing we have changed. So as I mentioned in my previous video, I used to be the one doing bedtime stories because it was really the only time I could spend with my children doing something fun during the week. But to help a bit more with Korean, now it's my wife doing this. So she reads books every night with them, mostly in Korean, because they are asking for it. They like these books. And also this habit has helped our sons want to read the rest. So she would read a chapter or some pages in the book, but she wouldn't finish the book. And the next morning, you can be sure that you find them taking out the book, coming to the living room, starting to read before they even have breakfast or anything. So my last tip or advice in this video is that you shouldn't stress yourself or your child, and you need to go at their own pace, because in the end, in 10 years time, it won't matter if it took a few months for them to be fluent readers in your language, independent readers, or a few years. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell icon so you can be notified every time there is a new video that comes out. And remember, the multi-literacy journey needs to be fun and enjoyable for your child, but also for you. See you next time!
이거 봐봐. 와, 완전 예쁘지?